get rolling here. The irony of having a refresher at the beginning of March is that we've already been burning for the last 2 or 3 weeks in this early season. So we'll kind of give a kind of a brief overview of the upcoming season, talk a little bit about safety, equipment issues, burn plan mapping, have a little weather outlook, and then hopefully be joined by Mr. Wheeler. I think he's out burning today. Talk a little bit about lessons learned. My name is Brian Teeter. I'm the prescribed fire coordinator here with Nebraska Pheasants Forever. We've been pretty busy last couple of years with some of the conditions that we've had. And we kind of started this annual refresher to kind of just get everybody up to speed before everybody really kind of goes out and starts lighting matches. And like I said earlier, I think we'll probably start planning these maybe a little bit earlier in the year just to catch the actual winter, since winter is only a month here in Nebraska. So as just a reminder that all prescribed fires in Nebraska require a burn plan by state statute and also a burn permit that is issued by your fire chief or their designee. And those burn permits are not valid longer than 30 days. So you can get up to a 30-day permit, but you cannot get it. Once you get beyond that 30 days, it expires and you need to get another permit. Just briefly talk about spring 2024. We've seen the Texas wildfires and the wildfire that happened outside North Platte recently. There's been some others. But just kind of one of those trigger points that we often think about, like if it's outside the normal, like if we're in the middle of February and we're saying, man, I can't believe it's 75 or 80 degrees in February, that should be a trigger point in your mind to say, hey, what's going on? Is this something unique? Is this something that is becoming the norm? We had record February warmth. We've had many red flag days. We've had high winds, a little bit of lingering drought in areas. And we also had some pretty good rainfalls in parts of the state this last year. So we've had some additional fuel out there that maybe we weren't planning for the year as well. But obviously, prescribed fires will happen, still can happen and be done safely. But we also need to be thinking about those things in our burn plans and our burning throughout the spring, just so we can mitigate some of those factors. As just an example, last year, you can see on the left-hand side is a 10-hour fuel measurement from February of 23 versus March of 24. You can see that, last year we had 10-hour fuels that were in that 25% range versus this year we've seen that those 10-hour fuels actually decrease throughout the state. So when we talk about those fuels, those 10-hour fuels, the 1/4 inch to 1 inch diameter fuels, so you're talking about twigs, things of that nature, having less fuel moisture in them than we normally have. And this comes into play when we're talking about our brush piles and woodlands that we're burning. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually be a good thing. We can actually burn up our fuels a lot better, some of that bigger debris that we want to get rid of. But we also have to think about that, those things are more easily ignitable and can burn for longer periods of time as well. Same thing with our 100-hour fuels. You can see the 100-hour fuels are a little bit drier than they were the previous years, last year, and then also in 2022. Same thing with 1,000-hour fuels and even our 10,000-hour fuels. You can see this picture of a burn that we did in December. This was top of a tree that fell out, had been down for about a year or two. You can see that this 10,000-hour log basically burned up completely to complete ash. Now, this is great from the landowner standpoint. They wanted this stuff to burn up, but obviously we have to mitigate for that in our burn plan. In this woodland that burned, it burned for about 4 to 5 days following the burn. So there was a lot of extra mop up and paying close attention to that, those smoldering debris that were on the line. So we successfully pulled it off, but again, we have to mitigate for it and plan for mop up for future burns. The other thing that we have to think about too is, this early spring growth that we're going to be getting. So again, the same fall burn, I got 4 inches of brome grass that are outgrowing on that site right now. So fall burns are great. We got this burn done early, but we also need to make sure that we have plans in place for early growth of brome grass that we may not want in our grassland system. So we have to think about those things, whether it's putting cattle on or maybe an early opportunity to spray out brome grass strategically. That early spring green up can also affect our fire behavior in both good ways and bad ways, right? So if you think about, lessening fire behavior where you get that early spring growth, but also it could be a negative if you're trying to kill cedar trees and you're in maybe a more grazed system where that green grass is going to affect how that fire is behaving. So really what it comes down to your objectives, what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing to think about too is, the later we get in spring, they're going to be affecting your wildflowers, early forb growth. You can really put a hard hit on some of those, especially if we get into late April and it's really green out there. So just be thinking about some of those factors from an early spring growth standpoint. As looking at the long-term forecast, which I think Sean will get into, is I don't think we're going to be, um, slowing down any time of our growth right now. Our soil temperatures are getting pretty high. Another thing to think about is that we had a pretty heavy snow winter, and this can affect our fuels as well. So thinking about, those fuels are really matted down and compact, and so fire behavior might be a little bit different if they were didn't have any winter snow and we're still standing really tall. And again, it goes back. This can be a good thing and a negative thing as well. Looking at these pictures right here, if your objective was to reduce the thatch layer and open that ground up, you can see that heavy thatch, if you ran a head fire across it, you may not clean up that thatch as well as you really wanted to. And a lot of that comes down to different timing, like of your fire weather. If you have really dry stuff, maybe that head fire will clean up some more of that thatch, versus if you're burning with higher humidity, you may need to change your firing techniques to have more backing fire, so you're consuming more of that fuel as well. Using black lines or wildfire scars is a good way to utilize. Good thing. Again, this is a fall burn, but this could be also a wildfire scar. You can use these on areas that maybe need specific winds or areas that are difficult to burn. This unit was burned. The unit to the west over here is going to be burned basically into that black. And the reason that was done, it was a short day in December that we had, and basically couldn't get to the whole unit. And so this other unit, there's a little finger on the north end here too that kind of is a little bit tricky. And so we kind of just burned out this unit, and then we're going to be able to basically take this unit and throw it right into our black this spring to make it easier to burn. Seems like every year we struggle a little bit on fire break prep. Again, fire break prep is essential to save fires on the landscape. If you're skipping on your fire break prep and you're not prepared, ultimately it's going to cause you an issue. So we get a lot of phone calls this time of year of people saying, I want to burn this spring, but I don't have any fire breaks put in. We basically put them off until next year. I mean, if you're not ready to go right now, you're already behind the 8 ball. So, making sure that your fire break is prepped, you load that late summer, early fall time frame. If you can remove the cover, that's best. If not, you could rake to the outside, or if it is a grazed system and you don't have a ton of fuel, a lot of times you can get away with it. But if you're using CRP and you haven't mowed already, you haven't bailed it off or removed it, typically that just creates more and more problems for us when we're out there burning, because you have a huge thatch layer and need a lot more water, and you have a lot more tendency to have more problems to get that done. Again, we recommend 5 to 10 times the height of the fuel, just to give us um, an area to lay down our wet line, get in enough black, and so we're not worried about any kind of fuel slopping over the top. I highly recommend, if you're doing a fire, to use disc or rototill fire breaks wherever possible. Again, bare dirt is always the best. It makes fires a lot easier, a lot less water usage, a lot less things to go wrong. But the big thing with fire break prep is, if you're using disc or rototill, is to make sure that you have bare dirt. Well, oftentimes what we see is somebody will go in and put in a disc fire break or rototill fire break, and it actually makes things worse when they do it improperly. So a lot of times this takes multiple passes um, to get in there, and then you also want to put that heat reduction strip in there, which is absolutely critical. Get some of that heavy fuels off that line to do it. Many times we're using these disc or rototilled lines in former crop ground, but if you can put them in other areas, grasslands as well, depending on your soil type. Some soil types you may not want to utilize it, but these are very good fire breaks to use. And also, when we're talking about our fire breaks, you know, property or fence lines or CRP boundaries are not always perfect or great for establishing fire breaks. Many times we're going to see those dog legs or wooded areas that are going to be problem areas, especially with certain wind directions. So it's best to just square them up. And I think Rob and Charlie are going to talk a little bit about that. Spot fires and slop overs are always a cause of concern. It's something that we look out for our fires as we're doing them. Again, just to refresh, spot fire is any fire that's ignited outside the perimeter by a firebrand. Um, Big tips here for that is, make sure you follow your big smoke, right? So anytime you see big smoke or embers crossing those lines, we need to make sure that those patrol and everybody on the fire line is looking across that line and making sure that those things are being looked at and followed down. And during your briefing, make sure you plan the response during that stage and discuss it during that briefing. It's really important that you have a plan for that if those things happen. Really critical. So again, I'm just going to reiterate here. Typically, go check downwind after the ring fire is lit. You know, a lot of times we end up on the upwind side, got the ring fire done, and everybody's kind of standing there watching this big plume of smoke. Make sure that once you do ring that fire, that you already have spotters already downwind, looking for any embers that can transport any embers across the line and start a spot fire. Oklahoma State University has some great data on probability of ignition of spot fires. You can see that, you know, relative humidity, if it's over 40 degrees or over 40%, there's a very low probability of a fire or a spot fire occurring if an ember lands in receptacle fuel. And as that humidity gets below 40%, you can see that probability of ignition going up. So if you're burning in that 20 to 40% humidity range, your probability of spot fires happening, if an ember lands in receptive fuel, goes up. And so we need to make sure that we're looking out for that and mitigating that. Humidity is one of those things that is a huge factor playing in our burns. Another thing that we've seen over the years is, when we're putting in our initial fires, doing our strip head firing off that line, we see people that are, you know, maybe speed up a little bit too fast and going too fast, and that's what's causing some slop over issues or some spot fires that we need to take into consideration. So Your strip fires need to make sure that they're dependent on the width of your black line and also looking at your fuels. Here you can see in this video, this is basically kind of where you're looking at, you've got your initial black line in here, and then they come in and kind of do some small strips. And a lot of times when you put that initial line in, you need to make sure to let it back off that line enough before you take another strip. Because as you can see in this video, even that strip that they're taking right there, this is pretty small fuels, low amount of fuels, not very tall. You can see that even just that second little strip, that fire is almost reaching across that. But you can see we got patrollers right on that edge right here. And then also somebody following up behind here to check that line. And you can see as we progress, just keep stripping those fires out, increasing the amount of black that we have downwind, making sure you're building your black. With those backing fires, those initial backing fires, make sure you do give it that time to back off that line, take your small bites, and it's always best if you can add that fuel reduction strip or have wider fire breaks. As you can see up in the top picture here, they're basically lighting right off the really tall stuff, and you can see it's kind of spotting over and slopping over across that line, and that's why we need those patrollers on that line. In the bottom one here, you can see that they got that initial line in, wet line in, and they're kind of slowly stripping this out until they get to that taller fuel. So we see this pretty commonly, slop overs where they're lighting next to the tall fuel. So we always say if you're going to light off the middle of that fire break. And I know sometimes that fuel is not very tall and it's kind of a pain to get it blacked out, but it makes it a lot safer to do it this way. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it. Here's a slop over that happened a couple years ago. Again, they were lighting right off of that tall fuel. Strip fire came in a little bit too close and it kind of jumped that line. You can see where that wet line was laid down and then where it jumped here. So we got to be careful of those slop overs that happen. It's probably the number one way fires get out uh, on that initial line. Just briefly talking about slop overs, spot fires, and escapes. Direct attack. Typically, if a fire is already established outside of your fire line, it's already developed into a fire and escape, making sure you're starting at that rear of the fire and hitting that fire along the edge. If you got one crew, take that longest flank or the flank that maybe is going to be most need to be protected, have resources or potential wind shifts that are making that the problem area, and then basically keep fighting it from that black if you can. Many times, depending on the flank, you can also fight from the grassland side. But when you're fighting from that grassland side, you need to make sure that you are protected from your rear. So if you got to make sure you put down enough water on it that you're actually putting it out. Otherwise, it could flare up behind you. And so it's always good to have somebody following up with you to make sure that you're putting it out, to make sure you're putting enough water on it to get it out so it doesn't flare up and then catch you from behind. And if you got a bigger fire that is developed, you could do the direct attack, pinch it off. Again, same concept, start from the rear. As you work toward the front of the fire, taking out that rear is going to help decrease the amount of fire that's happening on your head. Again, try to fight for the black if possible. One of the things that we see if you do fight for the black is that a lot of times there's a lot of residual fire that's happening in that black. And so sometimes it's not possible to get very close depending on how much fuel there is and everything. So again, make sure that you're putting enough water down to put it out. And then if you have just small slops, like we saw some in those previous pictures, you can kind of basically just knock it down at the head and work your way around it pretty easily. Biggest thing is to catch these things while they're small. And if you have to cease ignitions, do so. Sometimes it's not always safe to cease ignitions, but try to knock it down as fast as possible. And then if a spot fire does develop into a full blown escape, you may need to reposition tenders or equipment to contain it. And then once you think containment is not necessary possible, make sure you call 911 as soon as possible. Volunteer fire departments are all volunteer. It does take time for them to get to the station and then geared up and get the equipment out the door and on site. So the sooner you can do that, the better. The other thing that we need to do is make sure we just minimize hazards prior to burning, right? This all goes into our burn planning, getting rid of any volatile trees or grasses near the line, getting rid of excessive residues, planning our burns, so they don't have to worry about dog legs, things like that. Residual brush piles are always a problem when they're near the line. You can burn those out during the wintertime or in that early summer time frame when there's a lot of fuel moisture on the landscape. We utilize wet lines a majority of the time for our fires. The amount, the width, and the pressure is all determined by those conditions. And a lot of times we got to figure that on the fly. You want to put enough water down at the right width and pressure to make sure you're soaking all the fuels and getting everything correct that way, but you don't want to put down so much that you're also just wasting water. Water could be a precious commodity. We don't always have access to good refill sites beyond our tenders and things like that. The heat, the humidity, fuel loads are all going to determine how long those wet lines are going to hold and how that line is going to hold. So obviously, if it's drier, warmer, higher fuel loads, they're not going to last as long as if we have those other conditions. The other thing that we see is make sure that hose operator is inside of a side mirror so they can communicate with the driver using hand signals, stop or keep going. You can obviously communicate with radios. Everybody on the line should have radios with them, but hand communication is always best, especially with that line of sight with that hose operator. Holding and patrol are really critical positions on the fire line. Is probably one of the toughest jobs. It could be very boring. It should be very boring at times. But making sure that your holders and patrol are constantly patrolling that line and making sure that nothing's getting out, going back and forth. That first ATV should always stay pretty close to that engine, and your second ATV on patrol should be usually going all the way back to that starting point, constantly checking for any materials and spot fires. Mop up is a big one. I know after a long day on the fire line, everybody kind of wants to, go home and everybody's tired. But mop up is really where we've struggled the last couple of years. Some fires have gotten out. Make sure that stay behind and get everything mopped up, especially if you are dealing with any trees, wooded materials that are going to burn for a while. You can stick around. You got to flip logs, make sure everything's out, or catch anything up in the trees that's burning. And a lot of times you can't even see some of this stuff until the evening time. So make sure that you're not declaring your burn out for at least 24 hours. And then also it needs longer if it's like a woodland or low humidity, high wind days ahead, or you've been in drought. In a grassland situation, a lot of times we basically are going to mop up within that 15 to 20-foot line of that in that grassland. If you're in an area that's actively grazing with cattle, we like to use a harrow to break up those cow pies, clumps of grass. Again, you can kind of see where we use a harrow right on the edge of this line. I like to stay a couple feet or about a foot or two off of that line of those clumps, because sometimes they can kick outside of the unit. So if you're a couple feet in and run that harrow around that unit, it really helps break it up, go around it. And then obviously if you have somebody when they're running that to have follow them with some water with either your pumper or ATV, UTV to catch anything that's going to jump outside of there. Another big thing is check those piles near the fire line. get them all either consumed or pre-burn, get them out of the unit or further into the unit. And always check that forecast for the next couple days too. Um, we've seen a lot of times this last couple years, we get red flag conditions after a burn and something kicks up. So checking that forecast and patrolling for the next several days if you need to make sure nothing jumps on you. Drip torches, we've seen some problems with some drip torches, not having the correct fuel mixtures in them. And then also they were being filled too full, so they're geysering. We've also had an instance a couple years ago where somebody filled up a drip torch fuel can with straight gas. You can imagine how that went. Geysering and flying out everywhere. Another thing to consider too is with those drip torches, you make sure you're secured to the vehicle and close the valves when you're putting them in the vehicle. We had a good lessons learned a couple years ago, where we were done with the fire. We went to do another fire. A bunch of drip torches got thrown in the back of a vehicle, a UTV, and fuel was leaking out all over the back of that UTV. The UTV ended up catching on fire. So um, after the burn, it's always good practice to open the valves and empty the drip torches for storage. If you use Panama torches, if you close the valve and have fuel still in them, the what happens is the gaskets on them start to splay pretty bad because their pressure builds up inside of those drip torches. And then the next time you go out to burn, you got fuel leaking all over the place. Just look briefly about test fires. Don't skip test fires, and also don't skip on your briefing. Make sure it's thorough. I use test fires as a way to see how fast fuel is burning, how long your wet line is going to stay wet, monitor that thatch amount, use it to adjust your nozzles, drip torches, and kind of do a final check through to see, make sure everything's good to go before we give an ultimate go and no go decision. Um, make sure everybody's comfortable, everybody's got drip torch fuel in their trucks, all that stuff. Making sure you've got good water sources, additional water sources. Always plan to use more water than you think you will. It's always good to have more water and not need it, and then not have need the water and not have it. So have the ways to refill fast if you need to. Make sure you test out those tenders and transfer pumps before you start the burn. We've seen several instances where tenders weren't fired up and they're sitting there struggling to try to get those tenders fired up. And then if you have units that are draft capable, make sure people know how to use that capability. Otherwise, we're just running around trying to figure out how to get that to work. And then make sure everybody knows your locations to refill the water, to get more water if they need to. So just talking about, our timeline, 6 to 8 months before you burn in, you need to have that burn plan finished and your fire breaks in. So if you don't have those in currently, you're already behind the 8 ball in that. When you're about a week out, you need to get your burn permit, contact your neighbors, double check your fire breaks. 3 days out, get your fuel, plan a meal, get your drinking water, check forecast again, sending out that email, looking for help. Again, checking that weather 2 days out, send an email out again. And the day before, check your weather again, send out your emails, make sure you've got enough crew and equipment. Morning of, again, check that weather. That weather is constantly changing on us. So we typically are going to be sending out a go, no go that early morning of a burn, and go through your burn day and crew briefing checklists day of. And all of this is because we have a pretty limited window of opportunity to burn, typically in the springtime. So the more you can plan ahead and the more you are ready to go, the better you're going to be. On average in Nebraska, we've got about 10 to 15 good days. And some of those aren't even good days. Some of those are excuse me, marginal days. So if you're not ready to go, you could be missing a window of opportunity. Just like this year, February popped up, early March. We've got a bunch of really good days. We have a lot of people that are not ready to go. Their burn plants are not done. Fire breaks haven't been inspected. And we're missing out on really good burn days early in the season to get stuff done. So with that, we'll take any questions. If anybody has anything.
All right. Hey, everybody. Like Brian said, my name is Ashley Oblander. I'm a prescribed fire specialist for the eastern half of Nebraska with PF and QF. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about safety and then just some equipment reminders as you're going into the season. I have a really short safety message just regarding drowsy driving. This got brought up a couple months ago to me, and I think it's interesting as a reminder because when we're on the fire line, we focus a lot about safety and we think about all the things that could go wrong once we're on the burn. But in reality, a lot of the times when we have a burn day, the most dangerous part of that day is probably our commute there and back, especially when they're long commutes like they can be when we're burning in rural areas. And not just in prescribed fire and wildland fire as well. This 6 minutes for safety that comes from NWCG says that vehicle accidents are the source of more deaths and serious injuries to firefighters than any other cause at the moment. Drowsy driving crashes occur most frequently right away in the morning and then late afternoon because of circadian rhythms. And well, we're hopefully not driving to burns at 4 in the morning. That late afternoon period is right when a lot of us are driving home. We've been on the line for hours. A lot of the time, we're also pulling a trailer. So all of that put together can make for maybe not always a dangerous situation, but just something to be mindful of when you're out there. Here's an example from the Wildland Firefighters Lessons Learned Center. So in this case, there was a hand crew that was traveling in a convoy. One of the trucks veered because it was a fatigued driver. And if that tree wouldn't have caught him, you can see that it could have been pretty bad if they veered off and went down into that and kept rolling. So luckily here, the driver and passengers weren't injured. Everyone was just fine. But just want everyone to think about when you're planning your day and you're planning to go to burns, try to maybe carpool with people so that you have other people to drive if you get tired or someone to talk to at least so you're not your attention span isn't as short and your reaction time. And then if you do get tired and you are by yourself, don't be afraid to pull over, maybe get a hotel, take a quick nap in a rest area, something like that. It's really easy to want to just get home and because you're tired and you just want to sleep in your own bed, but you got to think about how your reaction time is much slower and it might not be safe if you keep continuing. So, especially for people like me that are driving 3 hours to burn units, this is really a reminder to myself just as much to all of you. And then I will go on to equipment. I'll go over a couple things that just overall apply to multiple pieces of equipment that we use. And then I'll go kind of into some of the specific reminders for the different things that we use on the fire line. The first is when we're transporting UTVs, ATVs, things like that. As you can see, there's a lot of different ways that you can strap a UTV or an ATV onto a trailer. And I'm not going to tell you exactly which way to do it because everyone has their own system and that's totally fine. Just a reminder to think about that your straps are opposing each other and that it's tied down and to actually use straps. Some people, even if you're putting an ATV in the back of your pickup, think about throwing a strap on in the back so that it's not bouncing around as you're going down the highway. Straps have weight ratings. Think about that as well. Think about not just the weight of your UTV, but the weight of a UTV, skid unit, and water on top of that if you are traveling full. So yeah, it's just something to consider. If you have a tried and true system, that's totally fine. Just make sure you're doing something that, worst case scenario, your trailer takes a tumble, your UTV is not flying off of it, or ATV. A trailer reminders, this nice little graphic was from Google. A lot of us pull trailers all the time, so it's easy to just go through the motions and maybe not be super mindful when you're doing it. So making sure that it's attached to your truck, the coupler's latched and locked, that looks different depending on your trailer. That jack is in the up position if it can be. Some of them you can't do that with. You're crossing your chains so that if it does come off of your truck, the chains might be able to catch it. You have that power cable connected, and then also take the time to check the lights. Even if, you know, you were just using your trailer and all the lights work, things can happen. Mice can come in and chew some wires. So make sure that even if you're in a rush, you're taking a second just to check that your lights are functioning. And then if your trailer has brakes, make a plan of where to put that brake cable. You know, it's kind of your last ditch effort on if you lose the trailer. So it should be on its own connected to the truck. Another overall thing that's really important, and there are plenty of lessons learned linked to this, is winterization. So if there's freezing temperatures forecasted, which in the spring it's not that uncommon, especially in the mornings, make sure that you're using RV antifreeze in your systems. If you have the ability to blow it out with air to make sure that even less water is in it, that's great. If you can't, you can try to run the hose, you can run some water out of it. You can run it until it's almost empty to just get rid of as much water as possible. And then run that RV antifreeze through it. And then open all valves or keep them partially opened, whatever your preference is. And then a big reminder is that it's not just the air temperature you need to think about, it's the wind chill during your transport. So if it's on the line, if you're debating whether you should or you shouldn't, just do it. RV antifreeze is a lot less expensive than a pump or a nozzle or something if you break it on the way. All right, now on to more specific equipment. So your pumps, you're going to want to do regular oil changes on that. It's something that can kind of slip people's brains, but make sure that you're keeping up on that maintenance. If your unit has a drain plug, make sure that you have that with it. You know, you could have taken it out because you were draining it. You placed it somewhere, you put it in the cup holder of your UTV or your truck or something. Make sure that you have that for the next time you want to use it. At the end of each day, just turn that gas nozzle off so it's not constantly dripping down. Air filters in the engine itself. It's really important that when you go to start your engine, you're thinking about if you have gas, oil, and then if you have air moving through the system too. If your tank has a water filter coming just from it, make sure that you're making sure that's clean. Most of the time we're trying to use clean water, but it doesn't always happen. So just make sure that you're checking that periodically as well. If you're going to be putting it into storage, throw some stable in the gas tank so you don't run into issues when you take it out in the next couple months. When you're on the fire line and you're not actively using your pump, you want to keep it on in case something happens, but just turn it down. You don't need to have it revved up really high. Just keep it at an idle so that you're not overworking that engine and pump. And then, as Brian kind of alluded to earlier, make sure that you are checking the pumps the day before the burn. You don't want to find out that you have an issue with an engine or a pump the day of when you're trying to get things lined up and get fire on the ground. So make sure that you're being proactive and thinking about that day before. Hand tools is something that can be pretty easily neglected as well. Make sure that you're checking the handles and sanding them if you need, and then oiling them up to make sure that people don't get splinters or slivers when they're handling it. They're probably wearing gloves, but still good to keep them nice and smooth. Make sure that if you have things like shovels or rogue hoes that need to be sharpened, you're doing that. So if someone needs to use it to chop something like a yucca plant, it's effective and they could do it in one swing and they're not putting more energy into it than they need. And then make sure that you're just being mindful of where you tuck them, especially on UTVs. This is I'm assuming, this wasn't my picture, but I'm assuming it's a flapper handle. They're generally the longest of our hand tools. You tuck them in the side of your UTV, they're sticking out, you go through a gate, you forget that it's hanging out, and you just drive through it like you only have your UTV and it snaps. So not that handles are super expensive, but it's not good to be down one hand tool when you're on the line, and it's just good to have that situational awareness high, know what you're moving around, or just tuck them in a different spot so they're not hanging out of the side. If you're using trailers, make sure that you're checking tires for wear and pressure, repacking or replacing bearings when they need it, properly securing the cargo within so it's not sliding around as you're moving down the road. And then as much as you can, try to store it on level ground so that you're not bending that jack. When you're driving a vehicle, when you're on the line, always make sure to keep your lights on, even if it's bright out and you don't need those lights. It gets really smoky and others need to be able to see you. And especially trucks, a lot of them are on automatic lights. You have to intentionally turn them on. Carry a tow strap with you, again, especially if you're in a truck, just in case somebody gets stuck and needs your help. Extra gas for that pump engine and oil for the same. Watch out for areas that might have been brushy, and when they got mowed, they left up those nasty stobs that you can pop a tire on. Try to avoid them. Have tire repair kits in most of your vehicles in case it does happen. Change or clean out your air filter of the actual truck as well. I know that when we would take our truck in for service, they would always have comments about how dirty it was, and we were trying to be good about cleaning it. So just make sure that you're on top of that and doing it after every burn if you can. You need to secure the slip-in properly, whatever that means. All of them are different, so there's not one correct way. Just make sure that when you're bumping around hills, it's not going to bump out. And then have fire extinguishers on each unit. Like Brian mentioned, UTVs can start on fire, and while hopefully you have water to put it out, sometimes fire extinguishers can also be helpful. And then make sure that you're cleaning your vehicles of invasive species before you're traveling to a different unit. You don't want to be the reason that a landowner has a new invasive on their land because you helped them burn. And also, if that vegetation really builds up, it can get hot and can also start your machine on fire. So just be diligent about keeping your machine clean. Some other equipment things to think about. It's always nice to have extra parts around in case something goes out on the fire line. Things like pull cords for your engines, your gaskets for your drip torches, things like that, that if they go out could be bad, but if you have those extra parts, it's really maybe just a pause in the on the fire line and you can get right back up and moving. If you have a Kestrel, they're great tools, but they also can become inaccurate after a while. So you can order a kit to recalibrate it yourself, or else you can get it sent away to have it recalibrated. So if you've noticed that you think it's off, or it's just been a while that you've owned it, just do that to make sure that you're getting an accurate representation of what the weather's doing. If you have radios that need batteries, make sure that you always have extra around. If they're rechargeable, make sure that going into the day they are fully charged so that you can get a full day's use. And then in the winter, if you have them like in a trailer or something, just bring them inside so they can don't have to be in the trailer and get those freezing temperatures. Then it's always nice to have toolkits around. You never know what's going to go down on the fire line that you just need a toolkit for. So in your trucks, in the trailers, just buy a simple DeWalt toolkit or put your own together. That's fine too, but it's nice to have that handy if you need it. And then just a couple notes on PPE or personal protective equipment. Again, something that I'm guilty of is not throwing away gloves when they need to be thrown away. So if they're covered in fuel, if there's holes, if they're so rigid because they're so stiff that they could like sit up on a table on their own, it's probably time to just renew them and get that brand new pair of clean gloves. Make sure that you're oiling your boots regularly, and then make sure that you're wearing clean burn clothing. That doesn't have to be Nomex. That can be natural fibers like cotton or jeans and wool, but you want to show up and make sure that they're clean. As they get dirtier, they're going to be less effective on being less flammable. So while there's some pride in having dirty burn clothes because it means that you have experience, just make sure that you're cleaning them regularly so that you're also staying safe. All right. That's all I have for you, unless there's questions.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, we're gonna jump right into burn planning and mapping uh, with Rob Van Lieshout and Charlie Herrick. I know they're gonna cover some good things, reiterate some things we talked about earlier. And gentlemen, you guys, when you're ready.
Thanks, Brian. Share my screen here. Alrighty, so we're going to talk about burn planning and preparation in a nutshell here. So, ooh, hold on one second. There we go. All right, so developing a burn plan is going to entail, it's going to be a pretty multi-step process that's going to actually start with knowing your prescribed burn regulations, identifying your burn unit and your burn objective at hand, starting out with some burn unit preparation, looking at your hazards and coming up with the actual plan, but then also some contingency planning and how to avoid even more hazards on hand. Writing your burn plan, coming up with maps, executing your burn plan according to the plan, and then reevaluating how your plan or how the burn objectives are able to be accomplished, the results you had, and then see if you can replicate it again or if anything needs to be tweaked. So briefly, Brian kind of already covered this, but all prescribed fires in Nebraska are going to need a burn permit and a burn plan in order to legally go through. You're going to take your written burn plan and bring that to the fire chief, and if he approves of it, he's going to issue you a burn permit, and that'll give you approximately a 30-day or less waiver to burn outside of that active burn plan, whether it's for burning down a brush pile or something a little bit more complex like burning down acres to control woody encroachment. So you're going to want to make sure that you identify your burn unit, the area to be burned, and also your objectives for executing the burn. The unit location size and property type across all of Nebraska is going to vary. The reasonings for burning, a lot of folks around here do it for controlling woody encroachment, burning out their pastures to rejuvenate the warm season grasses and forage potential, burning out their woodlands, CRP management, and wetlands. And these can range from small, little less than an acre pieces to over a couple thousand chunks of ground. Objectives vary from, promoting those species for forage, preventing ERC takeover, promoting kind of getting back to the roots of promoting fire dependent or fire adaptive species like oak trees, and even stuff like removing vegetative duff for wildlife management. So once you identify your objectives and the unit that you want to burn, you're going to want to mentally try to come up with boundaries in which you're going to burn. And just some added notes is, typically a lot of people will come in and they'll have a map of their property that they want to burn. But as you can see from this picture here on the bottom, this is an old fence line. So this was an older property, actually. We ended up burning this entire complex down in here. But if somebody came in and their boundary was this fence line, that's not going to be super feasible to burn off of. You're going to have a lot of steep topography. You're going to have changes in elevation. You're going to have different types of fuel on both sides of the fence. So you're going to want to have to consult your neighbor and try to expand your burn units just so that it's safer to travel around the entire unit. Essentially, if we can be burning road to road, it's going to be safer and less stressful on the fire departments that are going to be issuing these burn permits, the landowners to make sure that the fire doesn't escape, and then the crew just to make sure that the burn is pulled off safely. You're also going to want to make sure when you're expanding your burn unit or planning it all together that you remove any dog legs or areas with changes in fuel like wooded draws or differing types of fuel type, like maybe some areas of your pasture that you're targeting to burn have half a season of deferment on them, but you want to try to avoid some areas outside of your burn unit that have maybe those longer duration deferment types that you're not looking to burn right away. You're also going to want to make sure that you limit any impassables, steep hazardous cuts, anything that's going to be difficult to traverse across, especially if people are driving along with pickup trucks that have slip-ins with water on top, because that can be pretty hazardous. So here's just a example of a real life scenario. The picture on the left here is a unit that a landowner walked into the NRCS office, and he wanted to put this north piece through a brush management project and a deferral and a burn project. But he also had this odd shaped piece in here that wasn't in any sort of program. He had CRP fields that are surrounding the pasture ground up top here that he didn't necessarily want to burn, but it could be a viable option to burn in the future. And so he came in and, initially we kind of drew this draft unit to burn. Like this is a project that we'd like to burn at some point. Realistically, though, this is a really just odd shaped burn unit. Depending on what kind of a wind direction you had, you might be able to pull this off as a good burn. But given the variances in topography that it had out here, I wish I could kind of display it. This is actually in a bottom piece right here. So you got a lot of changes in topography that would make it really difficult to safely pull this off without any sort of an escape. So instead, we came up with two separate units out of here that have, straighter edges, more of a square shape. You can more easily burn in different wind directions with different topography and different crews. We ended up actually pulling off this burn unit up top here in the spring, and then this unit down here was meant to be done at a later date. This little piece here in the middle was just a heavily grazed little feedlot down here that just couldn't build up the amount of fuel required to carry off a burn, so we use this as a staging zone. Just covering real quick some temporary fire breaks that we often see every year. Brian kind of covered this, but just for the sake of planning, if you're installing some mowed fire breaks, you're going to want to make sure that you go in and mow these out several months before your planned burn. This is going to give enough time for that vegetation to adequately break down. If you can, if your program allows, or if it's your own property, please just hay and bale it up if it's at all possible. If you can't bale it up, rake it to the outside of your unit. This is going to limit any sort of thatch that's going to sit over top of that wet line, and it's just going to be making ignition way easier going forward. To limit any sort of heat that's on the line, we recommend, and sometimes, depending on the program you're in, there might be a standard that your width is going to need to be at least 10 times the height of your fuels. So if you got 3 foot tall blue stem, make sure that your fire breaks are about 30 feet wide. Here's an example of a disked, rototilled, and mowed fire line. Obviously fire is not going to burn on dirt if it's adequately churned over and a lot of the sod is broken down. So this is going to limit pretty much a lot, if not all, of the water that you're going to be using. If you combine this disked line with this mowed in buffer heat reduction strip, as Brian was calling it, you can just light off of this and it'll slowly creep into here and develop enough black so that when it does hit the standing fuels, it's not putting too much heat on the line and won't slop over. Again, just limiting water. You're going to want to make sure, even if you can't remove the residual fuels or the fuels that are going to sit on top, that this is installed months before your planned burn. Green fire breaks is a big one that we see on CRP burns. A lot of people install them and mow them down every year. Just some drawbacks. It's going to take a lot of time to install, about 2 to 3 years to get some alfalfa to grow up through, especially in the drought conditions that we've had here recently. If you don't maintain them, they are going to have some dry residual fuels in the understory that can carry a fire through, so they're not 100% foolproof. If you do plan to use them, you're going to get the full effect of using them, you're going to want to burn when they're green, so it's going to be much later in the spring or during the growing season. The fire will be smokier during this time. You know, and if you don't have planned fire breaks, you can burn off of existing alfalfa crop fields. Even middle of the summer, if you're not super dry out, some green crop fields work, or recently burned fire breaks. Here's just some lessons learned from inadequate or last minute fire breaks. Here's an example. This was actually taken just a couple of weeks ago. The landowner mowed his fire breaks a week prior to the burn, and instead of that vegetation being broken down and degrading over months at a time, it instead just kind of laid right over top. So when we went to go and install the wet line, if the pumper crew was getting ahead of ignition, that water line was actually evaporating just prior to them laying down the first strip of ignition. But also just due to the thatchiness of the fuel, it led to a lot more slop overs and a lot more water being used than necessary. Here's an example of some jackpotting and cut stuff that is located directly next to a planned fire break. This bottom picture here actually shows a line that was meant to just be an access point for interior ignition. But then after looking at the plan and the landowner trying to reevaluate and bump a plan forward, he wanted to make this an actual exterior fire break. Going forward, just make sure that if you're going to decrease the size of your burn unit, that you try to put your brush management activities or piles either as far interior as you can, or make sure that they get burned down prior to your burn. If you were to light off of this, first off, it's that radiant heat might just be too hot to defend for your crew. This is going to lead to a lot of spot fires getting cast over, especially if you got shifty winds. And then those thicker fuels next to the fuel line are going to contribute to a lot more smoldering fuels that might reignite days later and cast firebrands again and cause some escapes. Here's another picture of tall, potentially live or dead, but especially volatile fuels like cedar trees standing right on the border of a planned fire break. We'll see this a lot in fence lines right next to a road that people decide to light off of. Not only is that finer fuel going to burn up first, but it's going to cook and oftentimes candlelight up those cedar trees that can cast firebrands over across your road into another unit. You can see here the picture at the bottom. Looks like a lot of these trees down in here probably lit up and started casting over top, causing this big spot fire here. It looks like these two upper pictures are relatively clean, but just imagine if any one of these trees here caught and started chucking fire embers down into this woodlot down here. It wouldn't be a good recipe. So when you're planning, you want to make sure that you limit hazards. If you've got those volatile trees, cedar trees, taller grasses, yucca next to your line, make sure you cut those down, give them time to decompose or remove them entirely from your fire break. If you've got brush piles, take the opportunity, especially if you've got a lot of moisture or snowpack in the wintertime, make sure to burn them down then, or take advantage of wetter growing season time periods in which everything's green and your potential for any creep or smoldering outside of the brush pile is going to be limited. If you've got residue on your fire break, make sure that you rake stuff out of your burn unit or bail up and remove entirely. If you've got any smoke sensitive sites such as houses or power poles, make sure you limit that residual time that flames will be near. Remove any coarse material like old firewood pits or anything like that out of the way, so that nothing cooks for longer periods of time than needed. Here's just some commonly overlooked hazards that we see when we're writing plans and then comparing the final written plan to the actual burn unit that's been approved. Finding hay bales near the fire line is a big one, especially right next to a borderline where you're not burning off into the neighbor's property. Finding old brush and slash piles or old piles of firewood is another big one. Maybe somebody bought the property and didn't account for those areas to be logged and those fuels to be stashed up in certain areas. That can contribute to a hazard later on, especially if you got a wind switch. Standing snags, especially if the snags are standing up in areas where there's live trees around and you didn't recognize it, that can be an issue. One I've been seeing recently is planting around seasonal wetlands, especially when it's super dry like it's been in years past, and you're driving through an area like a pond or a swamp-ish, and it's dry when you're planting it, but then when it comes time to burn, especially in the spring, it's hazardous to drive around, it's slick, maybe it's impassable altogether. Fine fuel moisture, not taking into account planning your burn and burning it that year. Instead, maybe planning a burn and burning it a year later when fuel type and loading might be different. Ashley touched on this one, but if you're mowing fire breaks, make sure that if you go through brushy patches like sumac or planned shrub thickets, that there's no smaller stumps sticking up, because that can be a tire hazard. You could blow out a tire, and that's not fun to deal with during a burn. Steep impassable or muddy travel lanes, like minimum maintenance roads. If you're relying on using one of those roads, make sure that it's actually usable and accessible at the time of the burn. Another big one is trash pits, tire piles, finding old propane tanks in the middle of that. Make sure that any hazards are identified so we don't put anybody in danger during the burn. So we want to make sure that everything's wired tight, but escapes can and they do happen. So you want to make sure during the whole burn planning process that you've got a contingency plan in place for if this does occur. If you've got a wind shift, or if you've got a crew that's moving too fast and you end up getting spotting or slop over activity, you want to make sure that you've got some sort of a catch-all before you inevitably have to go to a trigger point where maybe you have to call the fire department. So if you've got backup fire breaks like a road, or maybe you mowed additional lines, or you've got a cattle trail, make sure that those are highlighted either on your burn plan and especially on your burn map so the crew is aware of those locations. Make sure that you have a suppression and containment plan in place. Who's going to respond to what? Do you see ignitions, or do you have a delegated crew that's going to come up and put out those spot fires? Make sure you have a communication plan and trigger points for when you call the fire department, and any additional mop up and monitoring as needed. So you got everything mentally kind of together. You got your fire breaks planned, and now it's time to physically write your burn plan. And burn plan templates are available through various sources. If you've got any questions, please reach out to one of us and we'll get you squared away on the right template that's suitable for you. But all burn plans are going to need to contain the name of the landowner on the land of which the burning will be occurring, the location and size of the burn unit, who the burn boss is, who's responsible for monitoring and mop up if it's different from the burn boss, the objective of the burn, maps, firing methods, suppression, fire break type, placement, design, a description of fuels that are going to be burned, a description of weather conditions believed to be required to safely conduct the burn. So this is going to include your minimum and maximum wind speed and direction, temperature, relative humidity. And this is going to vary depending on what your objectives are going to be. So if your plan is to kill cedar trees and it's in the springtime, you might have a little bit more lenient conditions than, let's say, burning a CRP for management or something like that. But you're going to want to make sure that those conditions are limited so that you and your crew can safely contain that without it escaping on you. You're going to also want to make sure to identify the equipment that's going to be used or that you're going to have on standby. identify any areas that might be smoke sensitive, like roads, houses, or communities where, potentially you might need to loop in state patrol or something like that. And then anything else as needed and indicated by your fire chief. Some other information that we highly suggest you include is going to be contact information for your neighbors, crew assignments, areas that are going to need pre-burn protection, that contingency plan if the burn were to get out of hand and escape, any mop-up procedures, a briefing checklist for your crew, and then a date time for the burn to accomplish objectives, because that might vary across the year. So then during the burn plan process, I actually like to make my maps at the same time that I write the burn plan, but some people are a little bit different. You're going to want to make sure that the burn unit is identified and showcases the fire breaks that you're using, the locations, the size of them. It's also helpful to identify any hazards that clearly appear that the crew is going to need to know about, where the staging and safety locations are going to be, where all the water resources are, whether it's a water tender that you're hauling in or hydrants nearby or even tanks, if that's the only source around, and then any surrounding fuels. Additionally, this is a pretty simplified map for filter strips, CRP, but you might be burning other units where you're going to need something a little bit more complex like this, where it's going to showcase differing fuel types that you have. On this map, it looks like there's 4 different fire break types. We've got a blackout, mode line, natural fire break here in a road, heavily grazed down lines. There's a lot of interior travel lanes for people either doing interior ignition or people that are going to be lighting off piles, or even just to jump between the 2 areas or the 2 crews to make sure that everybody's progressing at a reasonable pace. You might also need to identify areas that are going to be heavily impacted by smoke and where to access those. Ignition sequences is another big one, especially if you've got a big unit and you're going to have different techniques like interior. So once you've got your plan written up and your maps and everything, you're almost ready to go. But that's just one cog of the wheel to get ready for the burn planning process. So several months before your burn, you're gonna design your burn plan, design your map, go back and install the fire breaks that are going to be appropriate for accomplishing your burn plan. You're going to also want to make sure that you have the resources committed to help, whether it's a PBA that you're a member of. Maybe you're in an area where there's no PBA and you want to burn with the VFD. Make sure that you talk to those people and get ahead of the typical kind of how busy the burn timing can be, and make sure that people are aware that you want to burn so that they can delegate the right resources for you for that time frame. Then days before your burn, you're going to want to obtain your weather forecast. Maybe it's looking like you've got a couple days ahead where it's looking like a great day to burn. Compare that to your planned prescription. You're going to touch up your fire breaks as needed. You're going to want to notify your fire chief of your intent to burn and apply for a burn permit with your plan in hand. If he gives it a look over and says, hey, this is a great burn, sometimes he'll give you a permit right then and there. Other times he might say, hey, it's great. Let me know on the day that you actually want to burn, and I'll give you a yes or no that day. If it's leaning towards a yes, go ahead and coordinate your equipment and resources that you're going to have for that day. Then the day of your burn, you're going to, keep checking the weather, make sure it's looking great to burn, make sure you're not in a red flag day or anything. Pick up your burn permit if it's looking great to do so. Make sure you contact dispatch and your neighbors, assemble your crew, test your equipment, review your burn plan, go over the crew briefing and assignments, do the test burn, go through that go, no-go checklist. If it's a no-go, it's fine. Pack it up, do it on a different day. Trust me, it's not worth it. If it's a go ahead and burn. Make sure you monitor your weather throughout the burn, and make sure you record it so that when you look back in time, if it aligns up with your burn plan, you've got a good record of that, and you can indicate if it accomplished your objectives or not, and if you got to tweak anything between then and then. And then you mop up. But it doesn't really end there. You're going to want to take your burn plan and make sure that, you know, were the objectives accomplished? Did the burn go as you originally thought it out? Did you tweak anything? Did the crew tweak anything? Would you change anything for different results, like time of year or the time of day, or maybe even burning at night? Changing your firing techniques, changing the unit shape, changing the fuel load. Were you able to get away with a burn unit or get away with a burn where it was a half season of deferral, or do you need to add another year or two to accomplish your objectives? With that, I'll take any questions, but I believe Charlie's gonna go right into talking about designing burn maps for or any resources that are out there for burn plan mapping.
Thanks, Rob. Charlie, I'll go ahead and take it.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks all for coming today, especially for those who are not paid to attend this. It's good to have you on it. So we're going to start, just run through burn mapping. So let's say you start out, Joe Schmo says he wants to burn, and we'll say you pull it up on Google Maps. There's my house. If is my screen sharing, or is it still?
It is
not
not
sharing. Let's try that. Can you guys see this Google Maps?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So there's my house. So, you know, Charlie Herrick says, I'm ready to burn. Let's make it happen. And you pull it up on Google Maps. And you don't have Arc Pro GIS or ArcGIS Pro like some of us have, where you can spit out a map like this. If you are fortunate enough to have, you know, that software and license for it, you can get topography and you can mix terrain in with your aerial imagery and add all these cool symbols. But not everybody gets that, especially if you're part of a PBA, a group of landowners who help out each other. So you pull up on Google Maps, you don't really know what to do from there. I went through and tried to find various free software for map generation. And I went, for instance, to Google Earth. And I tried to make it work. You know, the nice thing about Google Earth is that you can draw a shape on here. And it will retain this one shape, but once you start adding other ones, it disappears. So Google Earth is not a great way to go. I tried using Microsoft Paint, and then their new updated version, Paint 3D, and you could draw on here, you know, make a line, for instance. But if you messed up your line and you said, oh, wait a minute, I actually wanted to burn to the road, if you go to erase it, you end up erasing your map. So that one's a terrible one. And really, and I even tried Microsoft Publisher, where you could import an image and then draw on it, and it came out okay. It took a lot of work there. So it's possible through Microsoft Publisher and kind of sort of Microsoft Word, you can make an okay map. If that's all you have, I would probably just print an aerial image, get some good markers or crayons, make a map on the paper, and then copy it. But if you're willing to spend a little bit of money, software that is available, it's designed for hunters and people who do sporting, but it works out really well for burn mapping. It's Onyx or other similar software. You could draw polygons. You know, this is an actual burn. So we'll actually be trying to light this off Wednesday. But you can draw a polygon and then say you mess it up, and you know the 2-track that we're burning off of is actually you know, more inside. You can just draw some of these points over and recreate your line. If you forgot that it actually jogs kind of weird, you can add vertices, so it's very adjustable. You know, you can add waypoints, for instance, to mark where your stock tank is. There's all kinds of little fun things you can do on here. So really consider something like it's a paid software. I think its cheapest version's like $100 a year. If you go up a bit pricier, you can get things, for instance, that tell you private lands. You know, it's just an online plat map, but that way you can tell, hey, this land belongs to this individual, and with who the neighbors are. It also has some built-in things. For instance, Rob mentioned adjusting your bird perimeter to follow topography better. You know, this blue line, dash line, like I call it the llama unit. That was the proposed burn perimeter by the landowner. Was this right here. And after taking one look at the llama unit, I said, there's got to be a better way. And Michelle from Game and Parks was pretty good about opening my eyes to just saying, listen, get to 2 tracks, crop fields, and roads whenever possible. So reached out to the neighbors, and this is our burn map now. It stays on 2-track crop field edges or road, a lot safer, easier, faster. And we get a better landscape benefit as well. Conversely, he wanted to first burn all of this over here. Turns out there's a big old haystack right here, and the landowner adjusted it just for these 8 acres to prepare for CRP seeding. So it worked out great that way. If for some reason you don't want to pay for any sort of software, you're pretty much, as far as I can tell, for making good maps, Microsoft Publisher, where you import an aerial image. And if you want to look up neighbors, or you know, somebody who's 3 blocks down, or you know, 3 miles down, or whatever you're burning in, Nebraska has GWorks. Here it's the assessor's office online, basically. A couple of states have this. Missouri does, Iowa does. I don't believe South Dakota does. I don't know if anybody from those states are on this call. But if you need an online plat service, plat map service, Nebraska GWorks does provide that. You can just click on a parcel, and it tells you name, their tax address, et cetera, et cetera. So that way you can reach out to the neighbor, or the, you know, people 3 miles down, whatever corresponds to your case. But in the end, if you can spit out, whoops, not that one. If you can spit out something like this, you've got a burn perimeter, you've got the travel ways, you know, hazards or things to note. You can put wind directions on there, and then be able to create a key, put in a north arrow and a scale, and the burn boss's contact info, and just an overview of the burn unit, where it's found. That's a pretty good map. If it's paper and crayons, or Onyx, or ArcGIS Pro, in the end, if it's useful and looks and is readable, then you've done a good job. Any questions? All right, I went even faster than I thought I would, but I think we'll stop it there.
All right, folks, we're gonna jump back into it. Next up, we got Sean Jacobs with the National Weather Service out of North Platte, and he's gonna give us kind of a seasonal outlook. So, Sean, take it away.
All right, hey, thanks, Brian, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak to you all. For those of you I do not know, again, Sean Jacobs, warning coordination meteorologist, former incident meteorologist with the National Weather Service. I've been in wildland fire since about 2000, mid 2000, up in South Dakota. But going to give you the seasonal outlook. First, looking at the spring, then we'll go in a little bit into the summer and the fall. So hopefully you can see everything. Here are the key messages about the fire outlook, first starting with spring. And I just want you to know that the fire risk is determined by several factors, including the rate of snow melt, which includes the snowpack and the snow water equivalent that is on the ground, frost depth, drought, soil moisture, temperatures, and of course, spring precipitation. Overall, though, the spring fire outlook for the state of Nebraska is above normal, and this is for large range fire growth. And this is due to an abundance of fine fuels and secure fuels. So any warm, dry, and windy days will present an increased risk of large range fire growth until we see sufficient green up. And due to limited mountain and plains snowpack, there are concerns regionally of an active summer fire season. Some important information to know. The region largely lost its snowpack and frost by the first or second week of February here. And we do anticipate an earlier green up. And this is due to warm temperatures, warm ground temperatures, the frost out of the ground. And there was pretty good sufficient recharge for winter moisture. So if you see on the matrix there here on the screen, you can see all the different variables broken down. You see that there's a lot of normal or favorable above normal for large range land fire growth. So let's take a look at the departure from normal precipitation. And this first graph up here, our first picture up here on the screen shows over the last 2 years, the last 24 months, and you see that most of central and eastern Nebraska saw significant deficits in the amount of precipitation. In fact, really only far northwest and northern Nebraska over northern Cherry County really saw normal precipitation amounts over the last 2 years. However, that has changed, especially starting last fall and into the winter, where much of the state has seen now above normal or near normal precipitation. And that goes speaking to the amount of recharge moisture that we've seen that's gone into the ground. So over the last, say 90 days or so, the state's done fairly well with our precipitation. Just looking regionally for this winter, I'll point out the greens and the blues and the purples. That's where we've seen normal to above normal precipitation. And you see, which is what's typical in El Nino winters, which the southern states or the southern plains typically sees an abundance of precipitation, and that does extend into Nebraska. However, the northern plains, and especially the northern Rockies, typically see a lesser precipitation amount. In fact, there are areas across the Dakotas and into Montana that are less than 25% of their seasonal precipitation. So here in Nebraska, the winter precipitation has helped improve soil moisture conditions. The northern Rockies and the plains precipitation has been well below normal. And the central Rockies has been near normal, but the plains have done pretty well, those Colorado plains. Now, if you went back just 12 months to the drought, you see here the state of Nebraska, much of the state of Nebraska, in fact, nearly 84% of the entire Missouri Basin was in drought. In fact, the state of Nebraska, it was nearly 100% of the state of Nebraska was in at least moderate drought, if not severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. This really plagued the high plains as well as some of the southern plains and even portions of the northern plains. However, due to the good spring rains and summer rains that we had last year and into the fall, there has been quite a bit of improvement on the drought, whereas much of the state now is not in drought. Only far eastern Nebraska, specifically southeastern Nebraska, is seeing drought conditions lingering. In terms of soil moisture and frost depth, Where you expect there's lacking soil moisture is over southeast Nebraska. That's where the drought conditions remain. However, up across the northern tier of the states, northwest and up across northern Cherry County, there are anomalies, positive anomalies in soil moisture. And I took this a couple weeks ago, but the frost depth, I want to point out that there's virtually no frost in the ground anywhere across the region. So that's going to help expedite those green up conditions. And just looking at the snow depth and snow water equivalent across the state of Nebraska, where there is snow, there's very little water. In fact, there's just mostly just snow piles, hidden in those shelter belts up across the sandhills. Most of the area of the state is snow-free. Thus, there's zero snow water equivalent there on the ground. Now, this is important in my opinion because this really plays in. This is the mountain snowpack. This will really play into our summer and fall seasons. What I really want to point out to you is the North Platte and the South Platte River basins. Right now, they're running about 90 and 92% respectively in terms of their annual snowfall. And there's still about another 25% of the season left where snow can accumulate. So if the North and South Platte River basins get slightly above normal precipitation, they'll be near normal snowpack up across the Rockies of Colorado and into far southern Wyoming. Where we're seeing issues are the northern Rockies and especially the Bighorns and northern the Black Hills, where just 60% or even in some cases less of snow has accumulated this winter. Now, on this map, given the pattern that we're in, we truly feel that Colorado will see quite a bit, or at least more enough snowfall to bring them up to normal values this winter. However, the Northern Rockies, we're not anticipating much more or much to bring them out of their deficits. So with that, there's going to be runoff that's going to be challenged up across the Northern Rockies and Northern Plains. Just talking about the upper Missouri River, only expecting about 60% of average of normal runoff. Now, this is the spring runoff, where the Yellowstone River is running about 90%. But right now, given what we're seeing across the Colorado Rockies, so North and South Platte river basins, runoff is going to be anywhere from 80 to 90%, 95%, which is good. So it'll be a normal spring runoff. And again, this really plays into later summer and especially next fall. So this is what you all are wanting to see over the next 2 weeks or so. Largely, temperatures are going to be above normal across the state of Nebraska. With it does look active though, the weather pattern, so slightly above normal precipitation, and that's for much of the United States as we get a series of storms that come on from the West Coast and bring rainfall. However, if you look seasonally, it becomes a little more muddled. So we're talking March, April, and May. Want to point out that much of the northern tier is going to be above normal with temperatures. And I tend to disagree. I would have the above normal that comes down all the way into the southern plains. So I truly believe that the next 3 months, we're going to see above normal temperatures here across the state of Nebraska. In fact, we've seen above normal temperatures largely across the entire state last 33 of the last 36 months. So I don't see that trend breaking. And then precipitation, largely the southeastern United States has the highest probabilities of seeing above normal precipitation. However, that does extend back into much of Nebraska. And for me, this makes sense. We do anticipate a somewhat active spring severe weather season across the state, which would bring good wetting rainfall. So we do believe that there will be above normal precipitation, at least seasonally leading into the month of May. Bottom line, and then I'll get into the long range forecast. We're seeing high fuel loading out there. And what I haven't talked about, what I will talk about here coming up is that we're going to be returning to La Nina conditions. Mountain snowpack is well below normal this year, as well as plain snowpack across the northern plains. Across the central Rockies, it's near normal. But we're going to see lesser water as a whole coming down. Those areas are our source region for precipitation once we get into the July through next fall months. and areas are frost free across Nebraska. And when there is frost that sets in the ground overnight, it usually melts by early afternoon. So with that, we would expect an earlier green up. And despite the recent above normal precipitation, any warm, dry, and windy days, we've been seeing large, uncontrollable wildfires or range fires, and they're going to continue to be possible until green up continues or ensues. Now, I do want to talk about the long range forecast because I think you'll really have some interest in this, especially since the seasonal outlook, it's kind of already played its hand. We kind of already know what's going to happen. You maybe have heard that there's a La Nina watch in 2024 for last half of 2024. It doesn't mean much during the summer months, but especially for fall and winter, that typically presents warmer and drier across the entirety of the state. So if you think back the last 4 years, 3 of these years have been La Nina. One has been El Nino condition. It was this year, 2023 into 2024 was the El Nino conditions. So we're going, it looks like, to be in another La Nina, which is a return to drought conditions. Now, we forecast this based off of computer models. So what we do is we look at the sea surface temperatures over the equatorial Pacific Ocean, and then we model what they're going to do. And all of the models, except for a couple of them, are showing a return to La Nina conditions by late next summer. And what that typically means is that you get a parking ridge of high pressure over the western United States, and that tends to be active across Nebraska with severe weather. But since we have a very dry northern Rockies, where a lot of that source region is, I tend to believe the latter half of summer will be above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. And that's going to continue all the way into the winter months. So here you have the seasonal outlook of June, July, and August, where we kind of have that pattern change. But by September, October, November, again, pretty high probabilities that we're going to be above normal, at least temperature-wise. And here are the precipitation outlook below normal, June, July, and August, and then equal chances. Equal chances just means predictability is not there. But typically what we've seen with our local research, typically La Nina falls tend to be drier than normal and certainly warmer than normal. So with that, I appreciate your time. I'm going to run up to O'Neill, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
See, next up on our list is going to be Ben Wheeler with lessons learned from a fire this past spring. Ben, are you on?
I'm here. Let me get my camera rolling. Is that can you see and hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
Okay. And then during a little bit of this, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. And then during a little bit of it, I'm going to have Ashley share a picture too. And so there might be a little bit of passing the ball back and forth a little bit, but yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. So wanted to talk to people about a fire that we did last year on April 26th, 2023. I've got a few slides that you won't be able to see. I think there's 15 of them here that we can buzz through pretty quick. This was a fire that we did last year, April 26th, so the end of April. It was a 465-acre fire up in northeastern Custer County. So if you're not familiar with Nebraska, this is about in the bullseye of the state, right about in the middle of it. And we were, like many parts of the state, Sean just kind of shared what the drought monitor looked like last year. It looked like someone bled all over the state of Nebraska at one level or another. And so hardly an acre was spared from drought conditions. And this area was no different. We were in, at least at that point, at least D2, D3. And also at this time, we were operating on tiptoes in the wake of a fire that occurred north of Burwell that took down, that ended up moving through a home. And so there was for fire to continue, there was a lot of angst. There was some people that were kind of wringing their hands. it was, the blood pressure was elevated for sure in the area with fire. And so we still had good things and good work that we wanted to get done, but we were trying to be very aware of just the community temperature for fire and their acceptance of it at that moment. To that point, we've been really lucky in this area that our communities have been accepting of fire, and that they've embraced it, not only landowners, but even community members. I think we've done a good job telling that story. But there was some fresh stuff from last year that people still had right at the forefront of their minds. So Ashley is showing you guys an overhead map. This is pulled right from the burn plan of this fire. Again, it's a 465 acre fire. It's big, and you can see from that map, you can see a lot of trees in there. You can kind of follow those tree lines, and you can tell, boy, there's some topography happening there. You can see just from the shading of the trees, the outline of valleys and draws. This was a fire that was being done. It was an equip fire, and so it was a fire that was enrolled through through NRCS, one of their programs, and it was also being conducted with assistance from the Custard Prescribed Burn Association, which has been around since 2013. Great group. They've got a lot of experience. They've done a lot of fires, and they're a good group too. They show up. We just had a fire today. This was our first fire earlier today of the spring. We had 39 people there at this fire. It was 200 and I don't even think it was quite 200 acres, but people show up. They bring their engines, and it's a really good group. On this fire last year that we had, that we're talking about right now, we had 41 people on this fire. There were 7 different engines that people brought. We had 11 UTVs and 10 ATVs. And for a lot of the fires that we're running in Nebraska, you think about that, and it seems like, boy, there's a lot of capacity on this fire. And for sure there was. And so I'm going to run through a few things here and talk about kind of the sequence of events that we ran through during this fire. And if you can, kind of zoom in on that map and take a look. I think the drop points are marked there, and we'll use those to kind of guide you through the story here. So in the morning, we got our final weather forecast for that day, and everything really aligned well with what we needed. With as dry as it was, our humidity was supposed to drop to 26%, which is right in that really nice sweet spot for our area where it's not getting too dry. It's not getting too hot. It's not getting too hot. I think we were supposed to max out for our temperature that day at 68 degrees. And so that was looking really nice too. We had winds in the right direction. We had some forecasts for some occasional gusts, which we did notice, but it wasn't too bad. Steady winds of 18 miles an hour, which were pretty helpful. The winds themselves gave us really no trouble that entire day. So at 11 o'clock in the morning, that was our scheduled arrival at our prescribed fire site. And then everybody's getting ready. They're getting their tanks ready, filling things up. And after about an hour and a half, so at 12:30, we run our test fire. And that was at drop point M. So you look kind of at it's a circular unit, but M is going to be kind of in the northwest corner, and that's where we begin our test fires, which is going well. We really like the results there, and we have one team moving east from M, and then one team moving south from drop point M. The west flank moving south, and the east flank moving east from drop point M. We're going along really well. We're kind of, again, this is in the wake of other kind of problematic fires in the area, and so we're tiptoeing through. We're moving kind of slowly, and at a little after 1 o'clock, and so this is about a half hour in. That second team, that east team, reported a small slop over event between drop point G and drop point H, so on that northern side. They reported it. They were suppressed very quickly. These slop overs amounted to 5 feet, creeping across the line. So it didn't even get to the other side of our mow line between on that northern flank. At 1:30, that second team, that east team, keeps moving, and they reach drop point G secured, and they continue to mop over that slop up site and kind of monitor it to make sure nothing else is going. On the west side of the fire, everything's going perfect. It's cheese over there. It's going really well. We did notice that hayfield between N and O, that our fire was really moving through that hayfield, cut hayfield, a lot better than we thought it was. And that was a little bit of an indicator for us that, man, a cut hayfield, we didn't even know if it would carry. And it moved through really, really nicely. At 2:15, our team is continuing to move on the east side, and they reach drop point F. So now we're working down the east flank. And at about 15 minutes later, we get to drop point E. So we're making good progress. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our team 2 reaches drop point B. So further down on that east flank. So this is 3 o'clock. It is now about 2 hours after the initial fire at drop point M, and we're moving around and we're doing good work. At 3:15, there are 2 small slop over fires in the mode fire break between drop point G and drop point H. This is that same place in the northeastern side of the unit that gave us a little bit of trouble before. So we ceased our firing of the burn unit. We put that on hold, and 1 UTV was on site right there in that area, which we had just kind of on standby. And then we requested we requested an additional UTV to come help. We're just kind of watching. I was right there. I'm calling them up and saying, hey, we need another UTV. We should be able to tackle it. And then the one slop over reached the other side of the mode fire break. And as you can imagine, when it hits a new receptive fuel bed, it really started to gain a little bit more speed. When it got to that other side of the fire break, a second engine was requested. And then we had a second slop over right in that same area that broke out and got to the other side of the fire break. So we're dealing with 2 slop overs, not too far from each other. They're within 100 yards of each other, but moving with that wind and progressing to the north of the mode line between G and H. Once we see that, we request another engine to come join us, and we also left some of those engines that are at the fore end of where they're at and where they're firing. We left some of those there because we recognized we do have a couple small slop overs here, but we also have an active 465 acre prescribed fire that we don't want to just leave unattended. And so we one of the responding engines was coming through, and we were directing them as they were coming down the line of how we're gonna do this, how we're gonna tackle this. One of the responding engines moving through began smoking in the engine compartment and caught fire as it was moving through some of that unburned fuel. The personnel in that engine evacuated the engine, and they were directed by the burn boss, who happened to be me, yours truly, to proceed on foot towards the black safety zone, which was just a mere feet away. The other responding resources were directed to treat both now the vehicle fire and the slop over fire. And within minutes, the slop over site and the vehicle fire were successfully suppressed. And unfortunately, we don't have, I'm not able to share my screen. Otherwise, I would show you the pictures that you're all dying to see. So at this point, when everything is suppressed, it's 3:30, a couple minutes before 3:30, which is only 10 minutes after we had those 2 slop over fires that were reported. So a lot of that happened in just a little bit of time. So within 10 minutes, the fires break out. They get to the other side of the mow line. We're requesting engines clear down to drop point B to come around, and they're getting there. Vehicle fire, things are suppressed. So a lot within 10 minutes. At 4:20, one of our water tenders around the burn unit at drop point O, which we no longer need. Crews have moved to that. We take that water tender, which still has a lot of water in it, from drop point O to drop point H, and just keep it on scene there where we've had now earlier slop over fires and this slop over fire. At 4:30, the east team and the west team meet, and they close the fire right there, kind of between drop point A and drop point B. And then we cease ignitions, and we had a total ignition time of 4 hours and 5 minutes. And then the crews begin mopping up, and then an hour and a half later, we gather together for an after action review. We discuss what happened, and we have pizza. So altogether, those two slop over fires that created such a headache for us, it wasn't much. The one on the east side between G and H amounted to 1.9 acres, and on the west side, it was 0.6 acres. So these weren't big slop over fires, but they did create a lot of energy, a lot of stress for us in just a little bit of time. I've got some pictures that I'm scrolling through right now, and you can't see them. One of the truck, and then another one of the mowed line, showing kind of the signature marks of where it moved through and when it got to the other side of the fuel. And then another one even showing, you can kind of see in the burn plan map those kind of some little swales there, and you can see even during our fire in the bottom parts of that, it was really green. And so we had some parts where it was having a hard time going. And when those slop overs ended up running on us in those green areas, that's what really helped bank those fires and gave us good opportunities to get some good work done. So I'm going to run through a few just quick lessons learned. And for context, when we're talking about these lessons learned, I want you to remember that map that Sean showed us just a few minutes ago. Again, where almost the entire state had some level of red, maroon, orange, and we were beyond yellow. I mean, there wasn't any yellow in the state at this point. So we were in a really droughty time of year. Soil moisture was low. Some of those early test fires we had before this, our bunch grasses, the root head of it was burning like it was just sawdust. And so these were the conditions we were in. So some of the lessons learned, the first one is our appreciation after that for smoldering time. So this fire break was mowed for sure. It could have probably been raked looking back, but we've burned and mowed fire breaks that look like that. And from the time when we burned that along that flank between D and H to where we had those two slop over fires was over 2 hours later. This isn't needle duff that we were struggling with. There was no trees right there. This was just thatch that baked for 2 hours and then found that opportunity to kind of break free on us. Another lesson, I've got a string of 14 lessons here, so bear with me really quickly as I go through them. Another lesson we had was just making sure that we're continually patrolling early trouble places. So when we had that first slop over within a half hour, 40 minutes of our fire, that's an indicator that we need to keep some resources there, and we did. But one of those resources, and this is another lesson learned, is that ATVs and UTVs are great, but they only have so much capacity. They only carry so much water. They can only push out so much water in a given unit of time. And so it's great to have them when those slop fires are still small, but once they get to a certain size, they've got their hands full. And so probably looking back, having an engine there patrolling we could have knocked those back while they were still within the parameters of the mow line. Another lesson learned: 3 hours of good weather isn't a guarantee of good weather for hour 4. And so at this point, we're tracking our weather really, really well. We're watching it, given the conditions we were in. We were making weather recordings every hour, and then also checking it every half hour. Not writing it down, but still checking it. And for 3 hours of that fire, our weather on-site weather was in alignment with our weather forecast. And we were feeling really good. this happens a lot of times with fire where everything's going really, really well. And you kind of get in that comfortable spot where I'm feeling good. And you kind of put yourself into cruise control. Things are working well within the crew. Things are working well in what we expect from our fire behavior. And then hour 4 happens. And so just making sure we maintain ourselves on a swivel and continue to watch for other stuff. We did, a lot of times we talk about lessons learned, and when we talk about lessons learned, it's people start to, and during an after action review, people start to stare at their feet and stare at their boots, and no one wants to talk up because lessons learned, it's usually talking about everything that went wrong. But I want to even highlight some of the things that went right. And so one of the lessons was during our briefing, we set expectations about this is what things are going to look like. And we even used, based on what was happening, we even talked about when our fire gets out, this is what we're going to do. We're going to call in resources one at a time. We want to make sure we're not leaving our large fire open and vulnerable while treating a small spot fire or slop over fire. And we're going to stay calm, and we're going to do good work, which we did. And so those expectations set during briefing really worked well during the response time. We also, when we requested resources coming up that eastern flank over the radio, we were sizing up our slop over very descriptively, talking about the size, talking about the fuel that it was in, talking about the location, talking about the rate that it's moving, and then also giving instructions. So as people are driving in their engines and in their UTVs and they're listening on the radio, they're getting a visual. And that helps create this mental image. So they're not just imagining, well, when I come over the hill, it's going to be crazy. We're already establishing some protocol, establishing some expectations, so we can have a calm response, which I really looking back feel like it was pretty calm and collected and organized. We did notice that the topography and the fire size it challenged our radio communication. There's a lot of up and down hills in there. Again, this is a big fire, and we noticed that when we had our slop over fire, there was people on the west side of our fire that had no idea that there was even a slop over, which ended up being okay. We didn't need them pulled over to our side. One of the things we talked about during our briefing is we don't want the entire fire, all the resources heading to a slop over, and then leaving our entire fire open and vulnerable. The vehicle that did get burnt up, noticed the person driving it noticed earlier while they were still at home before they brought it that there was a transmission fluid leak, and they took what they felt like was the precautionary steps to spray all that down and make sure that the transmission fluid was taken care of. They didn't know what level it was leaking and how much it was leaking, but that ended up being problematic when they were driving over in the black to create, there was still kind of smoldering material in there that just caught that transmission fluid on fire and ended up taking out that truck. There was fuel in the mowed fire break. Again, looking back, mowing it even more could have been better, or actually raking it in some way, removing some more of that fatty fuel, because it just smoldered for so long. We didn't really expect that. Even to this day, I'm imagining 2 hours, over 2 hours of elapsed time of that fatty fuel smoldering before it really broke out is still impressive to me. We never did request an additional emergency assistance. And I think that was a good decision there. You think about how quickly we were able to call in resources from our own fire. The head of the fire where they were at with their lighting was secured, and they felt comfortable there. And again, we're looking at 2.5 acres total of a slop over, and the resources we had on hand seemed to do really good work. If we would have requested those additional resources, emergency resources, just the response time alone would have been well after we even got that fire put out and adequately suppressed. I did have a trigger point where you can see to the north of that burn unit, there is a shelter belt in there, dry conditions, probably really dry duff underneath, and then a road, and then it's off to the races to the north of that where there's rangeland, and that was my trigger point. It gets to that shelter belt, and that's when we're going to call someone else just for a little extra backup, because then we're dealing with ember transport across the road to the north, and it could have been trouble. So we did have a trigger point to call emergency, and ended up not calling them. The trigger point wasn't met. When that vehicle came in, as they were approaching, we did mention to them over the radio, we want all vehicles to stay in the black when they're responding. That fire, those slop over fires were wind driven as they got to the other side. And so it had the signatures of kind of a wind driven fire. So it was narrow and it was long. Those two spot fires. And again, they weren't big, but it was the shape of it was a dart. And so as these trucks were doing good work and the engines were moving to the north to suppress those fires, it got to the point where it was narrow enough where an engine couldn't really turn around. And so the engine ended up having to take a little bit wider of a turn to get turned around, where it ended up going outside of the black. And so once it did that and caught on fire, and if you could see this picture that I'm looking at now, you can see that it began its own fire within the grass. And so when other engines were coming to help out, I directed them to begin suppressing, let the vehicle burn for now, and begin suppressing the grass around it that it started. So we got the spot fires, and then we got this new fire. And once they had that grass around it suppressed, that created for them some additional just space, defensive space, where they could begin working on the grass and not have to worry about fuel burning in between them and that vehicle. As it turns out, the engine in the back of the vehicle burning was still running, and a large part of the vehicle fire itself was put out by its own engine, and so that ended up working pretty well. The crew members, there was 2 individuals within that engine that were a part of the vehicle fire. They got out. They were directed to move into the black on foot, which was again within 10 yards away. They were relieved of duty for the rest of the fire, just to kind of calm themselves down. I kept them in my pickup and kind of just monitored them to make sure they were doing okay, and they were fine. There was no physical or kind of psychological damage that happened there. The landowner that we were holding this fire on, within their burn plan, they had 2 water tenders in there. And this individual had the idea that I'm going to bring 4. I'm going to have 4 1,000-gallon water tenders on standby around the burn unit, which was great. It allowed for easier and quicker refill time. And it even gave us more options to move things around and use those tenders a little bit tactically as well. And then the last lesson learned on this, so we had, and I'm speaking about this lesson as the burn boss of this, it became towards the end of it a bit of a stretch for leadership. And so we had, at the end of this event, I had 3 separate incidents that I was managing. I had our fire, our regular prescribed fire, 465 acre fire. We had the slop overs, and then at the same time we had a vehicle fire, and that was just a lot. That was a lot of things to a lot of balls to try and juggle at the same time. And we did it, but it was getting towards the end where I was getting to a point where I felt like I'm not sure if we have anything else happen, I'm not going to be able to adequately keep an eye on everything fully. And so it was beginning to stretch a little bit. I don't want everything to look sad and sour here. And so I have now this wonderful picture of the burn unit 4 weeks later, and everything looks lush and green and it looks like Ireland. So everything turned out well. One lesson learned I didn't mention was the individual of this that owned the truck that had it start on fire was not the landowner. So this was someone that was just coming to help. They were kind of wondering what they were going to do for insurance, and them and the landowner were kind of talking back and forth. There was no animosity at all that was held up. The person that owned the pickup was concerned of how they're going to cover it. And as it turns out, they thought they had just collision insurance, but they did have comprehensive insurance on that vehicle. And their insurance company fully covered that vehicle in a fire. And so I know we're kind of in a place where people wonder about liability and wonder about, what's my insurance cover when when the shit hits the fan during a fire. And in this case, where they lost a vehicle on a prescribed fire, full comprehensive coverage got them a new vehicle. And so that ended up working out really well. Couple slides and then I'm done. You can't see them. I'm going to describe them to you. So I want to remind you of that fire that we had last year. And other than those 2.5 acre little slopovers, everything stayed within the unit. And that was within a state that looked really red on the drought monitor map. And I have 2 slides that I wanted to show you that you can't see again, but one of them is thinking about the fire that we had northeast of North Platte about a week ago, that ended up burning 75,000 acres, moving through rangeland. And I would encourage you to go back and get online, look at the drought monitor for right now. It's white in that area where that fire was. It's showing no drought in that area. And then if you get a chance, even go to the drought monitor and look at Texas. Look where they have that 1 million acre fire in the panhandle of Texas. Northern Texas is pretty white, clear on the western edge. You got a little bit of yellow. And so the drought monitor gives us an indicator of those conditions, but it's not the only thing out there. There's other things that we have to take into account too. Sean talked about some of them really well, where he said, when we get a lot of moisture, that is great for sometimes banking fire, but it also accumulates fuel. Moisture builds up those fuel sources, and so we need to make sure we're paying attention to that as well. And then my last slide, just to bring some optimism to this group, and after a lessons learned presentation, is just a picture of the fire that we got done with about an hour and a half ago. Good work is still happening out there. Good work can still happen. Let's just make sure we're paying attention. Set yourself up well with a good crew and with a good briefing, and respond calmly and do good work. With that, I could take any questions if people have them.
I just have one, Ben. At the time you felt stretched for handling multiple incidents, would you assign somebody else to the spot fires or to the vehicle and then kind of just relieve yourself of duty there? Is that a good way to handle it, or what are your thoughts?
Well, that's a really good question, Charlie. A good way to handle that begins months and years before that, just building up a good crew, having a good pulse on what the leadership capacity is in the groups that you're working with. And knowing who those leaders are. And so being able to hand off something else. And I say I had 3 incidents under my control, and essentially I did, but I was, just with the size of the fire, I was not able, while responding to the spot fire and directing traffic there, I really was not able to have an eye on the southern end of that fire, where ignition stopped. And with radio traffic, we had a human repeater, but I couldn't communicate with them directly. And so there is some stuff, some trade-off stuff there, and just making sure you have good leadership in place within your group, and make sure you have a mechanism to find and bring up new leaders as well. But I could have handed that off for sure, Charlie. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was something that's a good idea to do, or I guess it depends on who else is present, I guess. Did I hear your message correctly there?
Yeah, just make sure you surround yourself with good people. And when you get to that point, if you need to hand something off, feel free to do so and find someone. And you could even do that during your briefing. Just say, hey, if we have something, can I hand this part of this incident off to you? And hopefully you don't have to, but you're creating kind of that expectation that I may need you in a leadership capacity.
Ben, there's a question here.
Yeah, I saw that. So Jason, I guess if there's anyone that can't read the chat, it says, do you think you'll do anything different on future burns to mitigate for duff that may smolder for a long time? Yeah, I think so. So we talked about on mow lines, just going through with a rake or with a harrow. That's one thing we could have mitigated. That would have helped. And again, we talked about it kind of during it, just making sure have an engine there. We had 7 engines on our fire. We had the capacity to just leave someone back there and say, hey, I need you, just stay here between G and H. Give them a couple extra sandwiches and tell them to go back and forth and just stay there. That's not fun for people that have that duty. And so we need to make sure that it's important. People like to be towards the head of the fire. And I've been to fires before where it's bumper to bumper traffic at the front, and you have to really encourage them to make sure they're still going back and forth. But you can do that. And then just making sure that you're watching it at all times, being aware of with droughty top level soil conditions that are dry. We have that potential even during times where we don't have a lot of drought. The potential for a fire to crawl across the line is still there. So making sure our monitoring is uptight. I feel like last year where we had fires break out, that was a common denominator, is the back door was really kind of kicking our ass. And so making sure we have eyes clear back there.
Very good. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All good stuff. I just want to let everybody know too that we have a new product coming out here pretty soon. And one of the things that's been identified over the years is that we don't talk about our lessons learned, both good and bad, and small and big, as much as we really need to be or should be, just from a learning perspective to making us better fire managers too. So we do have a product coming out. It's going to be a lessons learned forum where basically people can submit their lessons learned. And then we'll be able to kind of compile and collate those and invite people to speak at events like this, conferences, and also share stuff like that through social media. So that'll be rolling out here in the next week or so. And it'll be kind of anything from, lessons learned on the fire line to planning to mop up, to stuff tied to prescribed burn associations, to even things like the vegetative and ecological benefits that we see for prescribed fires. So it'll be basically a survey that people could fill out on their phone or on their computer. You'll be able to upload pictures tied to it, provide your lessons learned. And as we kind of develop it and share things through that, we hope that, people will gain confidence that they can share things through that. You can remain anonymous, or you have the ability to, provide your name for us to contact you to give a presentation just like Ben did, or at a conference or through social media too. So that'll be coming out here in the next week, and feel free to, add your lessons learned, however small or major they are. So So it should be good to increase our communication and our ability to learn about prescribed fire on the landscape. So with that, that concludes our 2024 refresher. If you're out there doing any prescribed fires this spring, be safe and let us know how it goes. So we'll send that link out to the refresher, and then also to the link to the lessons learned capturing form. So with that, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next year or at the fire conference this fall. So thanks everybody.